We are pleased to be joined by a really, really special guest in studio here. He's worked with some of the best players in hockey currently. The Olympics are coming up, and this is a perfect time to talk to you. He is also Quench and Sizzle.
Yep, Sizzle brand. So
Sizzle
Quench is our hydration
Quench is
product.
the hydration product.
Yep.
Andy O'Brien, thank you so much for being here, first and foremost.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, should be great.
We're pumped to talk to you. The Olympics are right around the corner. But I kind of just want to hear your earliest Olympic hockey memory growing up.
Yeah, some big ones for sure. I think so. I was born in 1977.
Okay.
And so I think the first real kind of national, like sort of Team Canada international event that stood out for me was the 1987 Canada Cup. So that was a really big one. And I think just that goal, Gretzky to Lemieux was huge. And so I think that got you pretty pumped up. And seeing, I think, the greats play with each other, that was probably the first moment that really stands out for me. And then, of course, like in 2002 in Salt Lake, I think just can probably in my head right now kind of reconstruct the goals of that game and the little nuance of that game. So that was a pretty big one. And then of course working with Sid, and I've worked with some other athletes in different Olympic sports. So I was at in Vancouver in 2010 and in and around the Olympics, and it was pretty cool to see that goal. It was neat.
So when you're working with, like, I know you mentioned you work with Sid and you work with other players around the league, how exactly does that work? Are you like traveling to be with these guys, or does everyone kind of meet up in one place, or like what happens exactly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't even know if I have the answer. It's changing all the time, but really just started out as a strength and conditioning coach. So a strength and conditioning coach is really just a personal trainer for athletes. And you're really working with the athlete to understand the demands of the sport and really train the athlete for the sport. So I really started out with that with my own private business. I grew up in PEI, East Coast kid,
Nice.
and ended up kind of migrating to Nova Scotia, where I started working with Sid as my business grew. And eventually my first NHL job was with the Florida Panthers. So way back in 2005. And eventually grew my business, started working with people in other sports. And I started actually at a point in my career, it's going back a ways now, like probably 15 years ago, but I started working with elite people in different sports and sort of had a niche of the sort of these top athletes where they have a team of people around them. So you're working within this like interdisciplinary team. So it might be somebody has 2 or 3 people working on their body between PT and massage or chiro or whatever that is. You might have 1 or 2 people on the strength and conditioning side, all for one athlete. Nutrition, physiotherapy, mental training, all that kind of stuff. So I started doing that and following around and traveling with these elite athletes became my niche. So that's very different than like running a business where you have a bricks and mortar and you have a lot of people coming to you and you're running an operation. This was kind of like me going and doing these deep dives with one individual. But I've also done the bricks and mortar thing as well. I've had that in multiple different cities around Canada, including here in Toronto. And so I've kind of done a lot of different things. In 2015, I ended up going to work with the Pittsburgh Penguins as the director of sports science and performance. So that job's a little bit more kind of like overseeing not only the strength and conditioning, but some of the data that comes in and really kind of framing out the whole performance department and how people work together, working a lot with the coaching staff, everything from, scouting, player development, all of that kind of stuff. So you start to see the frame kind of get wider, like in terms of what you do. And so that's just kind of evolved in my career where sometimes I'm the initial starting point and then helping players understand their needs and then actually connecting them with other professionals and having them just learn how to navigate that. But I still have my kind of 10 to 15 core athletes that I'm training and writing programs for. So I guess to answer your question, it's a mix. I got some athletes coming to me, some I'm going to them. Depends on the time of year, depends on really, what's going on.
What is like your most memorable Sidney Crosby training story?
Yeah, there's a lot, man. I'd say that the thing like in terms of memories that stand out, I mean, we're talking 25 off seasons that we've had together, and we started pretty young. So I actually started when he was 13. I worked with him a little bit that summer, wrote some programs for him, interacted with him a little bit. We met at a hockey camp in PEI actually. And then when he was 14, I worked with him the whole summer. And our sessions, we worked from about 8:30 till like 2:30 every day. And it was like that probably for the first 3 or 4 years that we trained together. And so he would get dropped off and we did we would do probably about 90 minutes on the track, and then we break, and then another 90 minutes in the gym. Some days we might be on the hill. We would do probably a second session in the gym that was focused a little bit more on recovery and injury prevention. And we would have to, can't go straight through for that entire time. So we'd have to take breaks. So we'd usually have 1-2 breaks during the day where we would go eat. And during that time, I would typically I'd sort of quiz him. So I'd ask him about, okay, what did you learn today? Why are we doing what we're doing? And teach him about everything from the muscles of his body to what are the key principles we're trying to do. And those times, for whatever reason, I'm thinking back, there was always a lot of laughter in those moments.
Does he have a big appetite?
He has a big appetite. And when we go to eat, it's funny, we would always go to, like, Subway was kind of our go-to. So back then, I mean, nowadays, Subway's not really high on the list of pro athletes, But back then we thought it was...
For Ovi it is.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
Flaming Cheetos.
Yeah.
Different bodies.
Coke.
This is it. So we were thinking, maybe some multigrain bread, and, we'd like maybe hold the cheese, and, we're not doing mayo or anything like that. It's all mustard. But we thought, hey, we're hitting all of our macros and stuff. And, it just... That's where life would just happen, in those little moments where you start laughing, or somebody in a weird outfit walks by, and, you just sort of start a banter. And I think what's really interesting that I learned is, our approach when we were training was really intense. Like, I think at that stage in my career, I was pretty intense. He's obviously really intense. We were pretty serious about what we're doing. So if anybody kind of came by or joined us during the workout, like, it sort of has that vibe of, like, it's very serious. And so I think when you have the ability to counterbalance that with laughter and enjoyment, and you have these moments that kind of take you out of it, it reminds me a lot of a locker room and how a locker room needs to be in order to be successful. It can't be too stiff all the time. You have to have some characters, to kind of keep things loose a little bit. And there's something about that laughter that I'm sure if you got into the neuroscience of it, there's things happening, neurotransmitters being released that kind of get you into your sweet spot to find your flow state. So I actually, those are the moments that stand out, some of the non-training moments, actually.
I actually had a coach when I was that age too, who we would get Subway on road trips, and he would not allow us to get sub sauces on our sandwiches. There's like only mustard, and I think no one had Subway for like 4 years after that. Hockey was
trauma. Serious. Minor hockey gets serious, man. It's intense. Well, first of all, Andy, you walked us through kind of your journey through this industry and how you've gotten in contact with some of these, super high profile athletes and your roles with different NHL teams. You seem like a very busy guy, so thanks for joining us today. I kind of want to go way, way back. You're working in hockey, you get to work with some of the coolest names in the business. How did this all start from day one? Because if you talk to a lot of big hockey fans as when they're kids, it sounds like you were talking about the 1987 Canada Cup, everyone's dream is to play in the NHL. Was this a dream from the start, or how did you sort of pave this way?
Yeah, kind of. So growing up in PEI, we had our sports were seasonal. So small town, and we didn't actually like specialize. So you had like one sport. So when we were young, you played every sport. So in the fall, you'd had sports, winter, summer, spring. And, I would compete against the same athletes in the other sport, so I'd be competing in track and field against the guys I played hockey against, and baseball and soccer and all that kind of stuff. So I was a multi-sport athlete, and pretty good at that, but not great enough at any one sport to be really successful or certainly play professional at it. But when I got introduced to the training side of it, I really loved that side. And actually where what kind of lit the fire for me on the training was I saw the movie Rocky IV when I was a kid. I was probably 7 years old.
That is the best Rocky.
Oh, it's the best Rocky, and the training montage.
Never seen him.
Never seen him. That training montage, I could still watch it and kind of get goosebumps. But that just made me want to do that myself for whatever it was that I was preparing for, whether it was hill work or sprints or, strength work. And I just liked the grind, and I loved the idea of trying to spend time on my strategy. Like, what am I doing and why am I doing it? And I think that was how I approached sports as an athlete. And I think playing different sports at different times a year, I had to understand, okay, if I was competing in powerlifting at times. So the training for that is very different than competing in sprinting versus competing in hockey. And so I just got really curious, and I think it was more of an experiential thing. And then as I got older and went to university, started studying the science of it. And at that time, there was nothing glorious about it. So it had nothing to do with working with pro athletes or anything like that. It was just for the love of the training sciences. And most of the people that are nerds in a particular topic, you find other nerds and you geek out and talk science and you borrow books from each other and videos and stuff. And that's kind of what it was. I kind of got lost in that world. So yeah, it had nothing to do with working with pro athletes. In fact, I was so into the training side that occasionally I'd meet an athlete who's an absolute stud, but if they weren't good at the things that I thought they should be good at, I would be like disgusted. Like,
I feel like we kind of feel that too when we see someone who's like, they're so good. And then you find out that like, I don't know, maybe they don't have as much passion as like we do for hockey.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Oh yeah, I would see them do a drill, and if their technique was bad, I'd like throw up in my mouth a little bit and just be like, what is going on with this athlete, you know? But then I think I've learned to, you know, at the flip side, at this side of my career, I've learned to try to enjoy what I see a little bit more. So I've always been so passionate about the off-ice training or the dry land training, depending on what the sport is. And from that lens, I don't really look at the athletes as superstars. I just look at them as people, and I just look at them as somebody I'm working with in that training environment. But I've learned to kind of take a step back, and if I have a chance to watch at a camp or watch a practice or something like that, just appreciate what I'm seeing, and just have a lot of gratitude for having a front row seat to some people who are just really special and gifted and doing things that are pretty hard to do.
You mentioned Subway, and like I think it's a very fitting topic of conversation because of how, I guess, science has changed, how we see our bodies, the modern day athlete. When you first started training athletes, what do you think maybe the biggest differences from then to now are in regards to maybe not only drills or how we take care of our bodies, but just like the needs of the modern athlete, social media and so much more, I guess, pressures and distractions that it didn't feel like athletes maybe 20 years ago even had to deal with?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think that's changed a lot with respect to the social pressures. So media, the spotlight being on you, you basically have kind of this this lens that where everybody sees what you're doing and criticizes what you're doing. And then you're also growing up in a world where you're sensitive to that. So you're aware that, you know, there is all these pressures and opinions around you all the time. So I think the social landscape has changed a lot, and the types of pressures. And I think just the mental and emotional environment of the athlete is very, very different. Having said that, I actually feel like the training science hasn't changed a whole lot. You know, the human body is the human body, and I think scientific principles are they're actually, they carry forward. Like really good scientific principles are the ones that carry forward and last from generation to generation and through time. And I think it's very easy to go back to some of the early contributions to training science and actually see that that not a lot has really changed with respect to how you have to develop an athlete. There has been some new equipment developed and new technology that we have access to and that we can use. We have the ability to collect information a little bit easier, but really it kind of goes back to like just really good, solid training fundamentals.
So I'm just curious, like talking about Nate MacKinnon, I mean, these guys obviously trained together. Like, did these guys develop just like a really close friendship right off the bat? I know obviously Sid's a bit older than Nate, but like you get the closest look at what it's like seeing these guys train together. Like, what is that like from your perspective?
Yeah, this is a pretty, I feel like there could be a movie about their relationship. You know, there's a lot there. I mean, starting off, obviously Sid, like Nate's a kid in Cole Harbour, you know, so Sid's 19 years old, winning the Hart Trophy and the Art Ross Trophy, and you know, in very soon after that, a Stanley Cup and a gold medal. And Nate's a kid at that point in time, you know, he's just a teenager. And so I think he looked up to Sid, and, you know, Sid was his kind of hometown hero. And then when I met Nate, he was 15, so he was about to go into his first year major junior. And it wasn't even until a couple of years after that they met. So I think he was getting to the point where he was drafted first overall. And then because I was training Sid out at his place, I asked if I could use his gym to train Nate. And so I was doing a session with Nate, and Sid just kind of like came out, you know, so Nate was in Sid's gym training before he even met Sid. And then Sid just kind of came out to say hi, like, cause he's he's so good at that. Like Sid's so good at just being aware of how, you know, other people might be expecting him, you know, so he's really good to give his time to say hi to people. And Nate's dad had to drive him out, you know, so Nate's dad was there, so he came over and said hi to Nate's dad. That was, I think the story got around a little bit, and a few people have been asking me about that, where something was happening. We were doing a drill with Nate, and Nate and Sid's dad were talking, and I kind of turned my attention over to them, and I hadn't told Nate to stop, so he just kept doing the drill, and he was just like exhausted, but going as hard as he could, like smoke coming out of his ears, basically trying to finish that drill, until I said stop. To impress Sid, like I don't want him to see me, fatigue here. So I'm just going to go really hard. And the guys that train with me know I'm guilty of that a little bit. Like sometimes I can forget to tell someone to stop. But yeah, I thought it was endearing that Nate, as a kid, was trying to impress Sid with like just by his pure grind, and his work ethic. And I think you have that in the Maritimes and in Cole Harbour in particular. People respect hard work. And they respect effort, and that kind of comes first and foremost over talent and skill. And so I think it's embedded a little bit in the culture there, and I think that story kind of tells it a little bit.
Hearing that you knew Nathan MacKinnon when he wasn't old enough to drive is crazy, and you're seeing him get out of the car when his dad's driving is wild. I think you said it best there. Like, talent really doesn't mean anything if you don't have that hard work to back it up. And I'm sure you see that firsthand with all the different athletes you work with. But in particular, Sid and Nate, at the level that they're playing at, Olympians, Stanley Cup winners, leaders, faces of the NHL, is there something that you can almost like quantify with them that you just say, like, that's what makes them different?
Yeah, I think if you just looked at talent alone with those two, and they had no intangibles, I think they'd still be really, really good. I think what Sid has in terms of his vision, his anticipation, his processing of the game, that's you can't teach that. It's so unique and gifted, and I think there was evidence of that because it was there. Second he put skates on, something's different, right? I think with Nate as well, just the speed that he can play the game at, the hands, the quickness, the athleticism. Like, I think that when you're a first overall pick, there's something that you just have. And so I think that's there. I think what has allowed them to be successful over a long period of time and more consistent, that is really reflective of the work that people do. So your ability to be at your best or close to your best consistently over long periods of time, that to me is the metric that speaks to your work ethic and your preparation, versus players that, you see that their best game is a really, really good game, but they can't get to that often, right? Or players that maybe it takes them a while to get to that from a developmental standpoint, or they can't sustain it, or they drop off quickly. So I think what's been, probably one of the most impressive things about Sid is just the tenure at which he's been a top player, over 2 decades plus now and counting, and has the NHL record for, most consecutive seasons at a point a game or more. So I think that kind of speaks to it a little bit, the hard work. So I would say that the stuff you see that is just superhuman and incredible, I think that's in them. But I think the ability for them to sustain it, develop it, and build on it is really about the work ethic.
Mentioned the Olympics off the top, and that's right around the corner. It's coming up. I think we're all really excited about it. This past summer, you held an Olympic training camp for a lot of the players that we're going to see, which is super exciting. Does your approach for a training camp like that change at all, given we haven't had to do many of them with NHL players in a long time? I guess, behind the scenes of like what that week looked like, or however long that period of time looked like with some of these players, and the things you're kind of emphasizing for them, knowing that international tournaments are a challenge and a lot of these guys haven't played in them. Like even Nate, for example, like the Four Nations is this kind of only international experience outside of the World Hockey Championships, I guess, but this is a little different than
Yeah, it's super cool. So the camp story that I started doing really went back. The first camp I ever did was 2007. Okay. I've been doing at least one a year since then. And I was the strength coach with the Florida Panthers at the time. And we had a couple of veterans, Ed Belfour, Marty Jellin on the team. And they had this suggestion of like, let's try to go away with a group of guys and maybe train and skate together leading up to training camp. So the way it works in most NHL cities is you have, it's kind of a show that week leading up. You got the NHL players plus all the American League players, draft picks, rookies. There's like 60 players there. The staff are running around with their heads cut off. Everybody's working overtime and stressed, and there's a bunch of media stuff you have to do. The training really drops off because the facilities are busier. The skates are busier. It's a little bit less disorganized. So I think those elite players don't love that time of year. So we had this concept of let's go somewhere, isolate ourselves, really push ourselves, and then you come into training camp like really firing in all cylinders. And so we chose Vail because Eddie had been a part of the Dallas Stars, and I think their owner had brought them out there. And
Worst places to go.
yeah, exactly. Pretty sweet spot. It's almost 9,000 feet of altitude where the rink is. So
Wow.
the second you put your skates on and just take a twirl, you're like, oh boy, this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
So right away you're looking around thinking, is anybody else, really feeling this? And like it's a really good place mentally, to really challenge you. And so, and then you've also have this. It's a time of year where it's actually not that busy out there. It's really like a ski resort or a ski town. And so, but you have 5-star hotels and 5-star restaurants all at your fingertips, and it's like cobblestone streets, and you can walk to the rink from the hotel. It's
Beautiful.
It's with mountains in the backdrop. So it's pretty cool. So that just ended up being the spot. And then I started doing that with all my clients. So because I have clients in different cities and different places, we've kind of centralized. And then I would always throw it out if we needed numbers. Maybe we needed more D or more forwards or an extra goalie, whatever. I just throw it out to the group. Does anybody want to invite a teammate or, invite a guest? And it eventually got to the point where we had like star players in the league would be on a waiting list to try to get into that camp.
That's so crazy.
Mainly because you go out there, there's no media.
Yep.
There's no general managers. There's nobody evaluating you. It's just a group of
The fellas.
guys, just the fellas, just doing what they love, having fun,
Want to get better at
cracking jokes. And even just the last camp we did in Vail was 2024. And I remember, Sid and the guys just like literally drive up to the front door and walk in. It's an empty rink. There's nobody in there. It's just a sheet of
Best
ice.
feeling.
Yeah. You don't have to go to the back door and get around the crowds, and like all of that's gone. Yeah. And actually it's a cool rink out there because it's, there's no minor hockey. So there isn't a sea of people, and you're always trying to navigate through that. And it does take away from your performance when you have other things to think about. So this is just training. So we try to make sure the food is top notch, the training, we get all the best staff and therapists, and we have great facilities out there to train in. There's a great turf and a beautiful gym that was built out there. So it just kind of became the spot. And then occasionally we've done them in different locations, but it's mostly been Vail. And so I would say the year 2024, that camp in Vail, that was the first year, because the Four Nations was coming up. That was the first year where players wanted to try to see, who fits with who. And I remember at that camp, Mitch Marner was at that camp, Connor McDavid was at that camp, and I have clients that are U.S. players and Canada players, so it's usually a mix. So it's not just Canada, but that was pretty cool because you could kind of see, you had Sid, Nate, Connor, Marner, and you could sort of see. We actually purposefully changed the teams every day that year, so that guys could have different looks. And like you would assume somebody like Nate and Connor, who possess the puck a lot and carry the puck, wouldn't really match together. But there was a day where I saw those guys together, and it was almost kind of like watching Gretzky Lemieux a little bit, like sort of, wow, how are these guys so quickly figuring each other out and seeing things and adapting to each other? And then there was actually a previous year where I had seen Connor and Sid together. I don't train Connor, but he's been to a few of my camps. And that first camp that he came to, he played with Sid. And again, Sid, really good down low, behind the dots, give and go, tight area spaces, hangs on to pucks, uses his body. Connor is lightning, really good off the rush, really quick, really dynamic. But really interesting to see Connor adapt to Sid's game a little bit and play a little bit more of a down low game, and actually started seeing him hang on to pucks. And it was, I felt like I should have been paying a lot of money to see what I was seeing, just watching.
Yeah, lucky
guys.
you, hey.
They're paying your money.
No, lucky. You earned it. You earned that opportunity.
Yeah, but that was pretty cool. So that was what I'd say the camps, when you have an international event, whether it's Olympics or whether it's, I'd say the big boys want to feel each other out a little bit, and they want to start to, get that experience with each other. And it is pretty cool. It's kind of magical watching it happen and watching how quickly they adapt to each other. It's pretty impressive.
That's really cool. And you mentioned Marner McDavid, and obviously the last assist in the Four Nations, Marner to McDavid, and
it was
the back of the net.
Marner McDavid, and again, both Connor and Mitch were guests of mine, so I don't train those guys, but they came to the camp, and so it was really neat. I think that was Mitch's first camp, and just really cool to see him interacting with the other guys and Sid, and he and Nate had a relationship, I think, from a previous event. But it was neat just to see the chemistry, because there's not much going on out there. It's pretty empty. So you're they're golfing, they're having dinners, they're training really hard, really pushing themselves, but then also just enjoying some time together. So, and that's half the battle when you go to an international event. It's a team sport. And so I think you do have to come together as a team really quickly. So that time together, I think, is really critical.
So we've talked about a lot of these big name athletes, but is there someone who maybe is not as big of a name that's just an absolute beast in the gym that maybe doesn't get enough attention?
In terms of not big names?
Yeah, or is there someone who maybe, we think of like the Sids or the Nates, like these all-stars who are like such beasts in the gym. Is there someone who kind of, I don't know, maybe not at that all-star level, who's just like still like a good hockey player, but is like an absolute star in the gym?
Yeah, there's a couple. And my first NHL experience when I was working in Florida, the general manager was Mike Keenan at the time. Jacques Martin was the head coach. Jacques, really big into fitness. A lot of people probably remember the Ottawa Senators on the bikes, like doing their interviews on the bikes after games and stuff.
Yep.
So this is kind of shortly after when he came to Florida, and we did a lot of testing. And I'll never forget, like, our first training camp, literally the top guys on the testing were like the worst players, like, on the team as far as NHL rosters go. And then you had some of our top players were near the bottom. And so I think there was a moment for me as a kind of critical point in my career where I could just kind of make excuses and say, oh, well, we just have some skilled players that don't work very hard. And if they were more like these guys, but how am I saying if the best guys are more like the worst guys, then we'd really have something? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. The game itself has its players are moving out there. There's agility there. You have to modulate the timing of your movement. There's a change of pace and anticipation, understanding space and time. There's explosive power in your acceleration. There's power involved in shooting. The dynamic way that you give and receive contact in the game is really interesting to me. So I started looking at all of that and saying, well, I might be missing something. There might be some traditional things that we think matter that actually don't matter as much to hockey. And that really framed my evolution in terms of what I value. And so it is true. Sometimes you get some people are studs in the gym. They're not necessarily the best players, but that might also be because the things that we're looking at in the gym aren't necessarily relating to the game. And so as you start to modify that, you actually do start to see like really good qualities. But there's a guy that trains with our group here. He's actually with the Leafs now, named Michael Pizzetta.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. You used to have that crazy flow.
Yeah, the flow and in Montreal. And first time I met him, I was like, wow, this guy probably should be in the NFL. Yeah, I think we had this really long. We do a little bit of work in a gymnastics facility, local here. The guys like the softer floors, and we can do some dynamic stuff. It's a little bit gentle in the body. So when you're banged up and you're just starting the season, there's some cool stuff that we can do in there. And we were doing some basically just broad jumps onto a mat. And it was a big long crash mat, like a high jump crash mat. I remember him basically just jumping over the mat, and thinking to myself, like, well, that's ridiculous. And the weights that he can lift and the things that he can do. But essentially you take a player like that, who at that time was playing the American Hockey League, trying to play in the National Hockey League. Part of his, signature that helped get him some eyes on and an opportunity in Montreal was winning the fitness testing, and setting records and, drawing attention to what he's capable of doing in that area. And I think when you get into the playoffs, that matters a lot more, because the playoffs is much more of a physical grind. You're going into these deep overtimes. You're getting hit a lot more. It's more physical. There's a lot more skating. There's a lot more stopping and starting as opposed to continuous motion. So I think those players, you start to see them actually have a really good impact. So I still think if he gets in the right situation, like he could be a guy that is an impact for a playoff team. But the way that we were approaching his training at a certain point was, you're powerful enough. You have incredible endurance. And so that he's got the gas in the tank, he's got the power, he can move, but now it's really trying to shift his training at things that apply a little bit more to his game and be a little bit more conscious of the game side of it. So there might be more on ice applications that he's doing to take that next step. But one of the guys that, Sid and Nate are really, really impressive physically, like off the ice and some of the things that they can do. And, but one of the guys that's really interesting is I did some work with the Florida Panthers as a consultant, and Gustav Forsling down there is really impressive. Like, he sort of wins all the fitness testing.
He's got that crazy six pack. That's all everyone talks about in Fort Lauderdale is Forsling six pack.
Forsling six pack. So when I was in Pittsburgh, we had Patrick Hornquist and Carl Hagelin shredded, like 5%, and they can crush pasta and pretty much do whatever they want, and they're just shredded, you know. So they don't even
Must be nice.
There must be something with the Swedes, you know, and a certain part of the genetics. But
sure.
when I met Forsling, I was like, oh, this is like Horny and Hags, you know, it's very similar to those guys. And it's very rare, like all three of those guys, they score really high in power categories and they score really high in endurance categories. So they're like converted. We do an estimated like VO2 max, but all those guys are like in the 70s. And so it's really impressive to see somebody has the best cardio respiratory fitness and also the most powerful and the fastest. So it was really interesting, as I would say, like, there's been numerous times in Sid's career where even though I see him a lot and I watch a lot of his games, like it even kind of, you know, takes me back what he does. But one of the games I think I was most proud was that first game in the Four Nations where they played against Sweden. That Sweden team was a really good team. I think with everything going on with Canada and US, I think maybe it fell under the radar just how good that team was. And I thought in that game he was on a different level. Like, I think he separated himself even from the rest of the players. The first goal was incredible how easy he made that look. And there's a lot of nuance to how he drew the goalies and the defender over and made that pass look pretty easy to Nate and gave him all that time and open net. The second play was against Forsling. And so he went wide against Forsling, kind of cut in, used his body, went shoulder to shoulder, pushed him back, created this time and space, and then a perfect kind of little drop pass to Stone. And I think I had a lot of appreciation for that because I know Forsling and I know how hard it is to get around him. Yeah. Really hard to get around him. He's a very good backward skater, really good at pivoting, closing guys off. It's almost impossible. And Sid kind of did that as if it was like just routine, like, I'm just going to own this guy. And that was impressive to me, you know, especially at his age and on the stage that it was, how confidently he did that. But yeah, Forz is one of those guys that I'm sure if every team in the NHL picked their fitness guys and kind of put them against each other, yeah, he'd be up there for sure.
Yeah,
I think that's what makes like best on best hockey, because like we're so used to Sid and Nate and Connor doing all these things, and then when you see them do it against the best, like someone like Forsling, it's just like, just doesn't really make sense in your head. Wanted to ask you, a lot of our listening audience, young, aspiring minor hockey league players, without giving away your secret sauce, what's something that you would say to them that they can do off the ice that will help their game on the ice?
Yeah, I think probably two things. One, I would say that to a lot of kids, I feel like there is no secret sauce. I think that with the age now with social media, we kind of get hit over the head with a million ideas and we can sort of chase ideas. And I think just getting to really basic fundamentals is really important for hockey players. Learn how to do simple things that matter and do them really well, and as opposed to doing way too many things. The second part is, I would say, the game itself is, I always look at hockey like a decathlon. So there's a lot of different things you need to be able to do in hockey. So I try not to over-index on one thing. So you have the strength work, which is really just coming up with like a really good, basic variety of exercises, single leg, double leg exercises, upper body, lower body, core exercises, and just being really effective at executing those really well, and then building that progression as you get better and better. And a lot of times when you get to these high levels, you're doing some of the same things, you're just doing them at a very, very high level. I think the mobility is really important. And the mobility is more than just skipping over a few stretches poorly done. That's usually what you see when you see young kids. They're doing it, but they're not doing it right. So learning how to do the mobility work, whether it's before you get out there, after you get out there, whether it's a session with a body worker that you might have, like that's a real big part of the game, because the movement demands of the game are pretty significant with all of the different types of accelerations, crossing your feet, pivoting, getting in and out of spaces, navigating tight spaces in traffic. Like there's a lot of mobility demands at the ankle, the hip, the spine. There's a lot of rotational movement. So actually, found when I was working with tennis athletes and racket sport athletes, a lot of similarities to hockey in terms of the lunge rotation patterns that you have, shooting, having the puck in different positions as you're moving. So I think that mobility component is really, really important. So you have the strength work, you have the mobility work, and then you have the conditioning component. And the conditioning component is real. You have to develop this aerobic base. And a lot of people over-index, I think, when it comes to conditioning on the anaerobic side, which is the typical kind of bag skates. It's just effort. But I think building some low intensity stuff and doing that a little bit longer to develop this aerobic base helps you clear metabolic byproducts. So when your muscles break down and you release these toxins from a hard practice or a hard game, for the moment that session stops and the next session the next day starts, your aerobic system is now clearing all of that byproduct and all of that waste. It also affects gut health, so ability to absorb nutrients. It affects sleep. So I think that you have to look at what am I getting on the ice and what am I getting off the ice and make sure that you're fit. And that's one of the areas where actually when you talk about the Swedes and Finns coming over, usually pretty good aerobically, they do a lot of runs as teams. So they'll go on these like little 4-mile runs or 5-mile runs like every day growing up. So they build that aerobic base. And then that means they have to do less of that later versus I find here, we love the intensity part of the game. So we have a tendency to build very powerful athletes, but a lot of times our athletes break down more and they don't recover very fast.
My girlfriend's actually Swedish, and the only reason I bring that up is because she's like a psycho runner.
Okay.
Like she like did not train that much for the full marathon here, and she just ran it no problem. Like it's crazy. So I understand what you're saying, and being in Sweden, it's like it's just different.
Yeah, that's massive. So I think you got the three. You got the cardiovascular work, the strength work, the mobility work, and then I think the nutrition is the fourth.
Yeah.
Just dialing in your nutrition. We have an issue here, especially with ultra processed foods. And the big thing with ultra processed foods is they're hyper palatable, so they taste really good, and they're not very satiating, so they don't fill you as much. So you tend to just pound that stuff and keep eating. And very often, you start to get imbalances in terms of proteins, fats, carbohydrates. You tend to get less nutrient rich food. So I think the diet part of it, it's challenging for people and young kids, especially when they're on the go and they're really busy, which most are. You're just grabbing whatever's available. And so I think working with somebody who is a specialist in that area that can help you, not just getting a diet, but actually having somebody coach you and teach you how to change the habit. That's a game changer. It makes a big difference when you can do that.
We're really grateful for your time. We got a few more questions for you before we let you out of here. As an Avalanche fan and as a hockey fan, Nathan MacKinnon, just everything about him, just I'm so intrigued by him because he is just like, and it feels like Sid is like this too, but just like kind of silent killers, but you can also see their emotion in different ways come out when you're kind of least expecting it. And I feel like they probably bring the best out of each other in those training scenarios.
Yeah.
Is there a moment that you can think of where you've seen them at their most competitive with each other training? Because I feel like we've seen some videos come out over time of like them skating together and how competitive it is, but is there something over the years that you can think of off the top of your head?
Many. That's there's no question. I think the way that for me, especially in terms of thinking of the greats, whether it's a Kobe Bryant or a Tom Brady, and you start to get under the hood a little bit as to what's driving them. These are like hyper competitive athletes. And doesn't matter where they are, what day it is, what the context is. I mean, it could be a nothing pickup game of whatever, golf, tennis, basketball.
They want to be the best.
It may as well be game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. I think it's this thing of being competitive every single day and being unrelenting with that competitiveness, like not willing to stop at a certain point, but to continue to bring it. And if you lose, so affected and bothered by that loss that it drives you to come back even better. I think that just has to be there. The challenge is learning how to control that and learning how to take that emotion and doing the mental and emotional work to channel that in a way that's productive and not destructive. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a lifelong process for these athletes because they are so driven by it and it can unravel you at times. And so I think sometimes you see in the summer, I mean, I've had some of my clients that are in Toronto or in the US or whatever will come down and work with me to get part of their program updated and jump on the ice with the guys and be just shocked at the fact that it's June and they're not expecting anything serious, and it's like all borderline fistfights in the parking, So how did it escalate to something like that when it was just going to be a twirl with, snap a few pucks around? But it always does. And so I think there's just something in the water there, maybe, that creates that competitiveness. But those skates in Halifax that they have, I would say it's blue collar, it's competitive. There's always a competitive game of some sort. It's very rarely just working on skill. And I would say when other players go there, they really feel that. It's something that really stands out. So yeah, I've seen off ice battles, on ice battles, I've seen it all with those guys. And even to the point where as a trainer, you get a little uncomfortable, you're like, hold up, like, let's just pause for a second. Take it down a little bit. And then I'm thinking, God, I got to separate these guys. There's no way that they can actually live together. So yeah, there's been a lot of competitions over the years and things, but I think what I'm most proud of is to be able to see it really takes you over, when you care that much and you're all in. There's a vulnerability that comes with that. Every single minute of your day is focused on trying to get better and trying to be something you're not, and take the next step in your career. And no matter how high your achievements become, you're never quite satisfied. There's always something more you're pushing yourself to. That can be really challenging. It can be a lonely place at times. And so I think just learning how to be a good leader, a good teammate, a good professional within the scope of trying to make yourself the best, it's really complicated and complex. I think Sid is the master at that. He's really the master at getting himself to this exceptionally high level, but doing it in a way that positively affects so many people around him. It really is a gift that he has, and it's I think he's a special person for that reason.
Part of having a high hockey IQ is being able to avoid those situations where you're going to put your body in a position to kind of get hurt a little more. Like, I feel like Sid's so good at, it's part of why he's been able to play for so long. He's so strong, and he's very wary of like where he is on the ice all the time.
That's a really good point, because I think, just personally, not speaking for him, but I think that his game was almost a little bit like reckless physical early on. Like he took some big hits, gave some big hits, probably a little bit aggressive to the point of like being a little less calculated. And he somehow has found a way to be really mindful of that risk without losing the physicality in his game, which is a real gift. Like some people have to really back away from certain situations. You don't really want to see that. He doesn't. He still invites contact when he has the puck. He still creates contact. He's still really good defensively. Like, he doesn't really cost you anything, but at the same time, he's also really smart with and aware of who's out there and what's going on. So I think it's been pretty impressive how he's done what you've said he's done. And actually, one of the guys stylistically that could be compared to Sid is Peter Forsberg, maybe. And it's an example of a guy that plays that similar style, but his body didn't last that long, right? Because he kept playing that way. And it's not to say that it's changed for Sid. He's just figured out a way to keep playing that way, but in a way that has allowed him to succeed. And sometimes that's just knowing what he has to work on, so it's saying, okay, I have to do this, and it's really hard for me. So therefore I have to work on certain things to allow me to sustain that wear and tear. So there's a process of like figuring it out, and he's figured it out.
He's an ageless wonder, and it's great to get some insight from you on what goes into making him the player that he's become. I guess we'll close with this. It's about Sid. It's about the Olympics. The Olympics are coming up. You were there in 2010. The golden goal, one of the craziest moments in Canadian history, really. What was that from your lens? How was that experience?
Yeah, I was at the Olympics. I trained a figure skater named Patrick Chan. He's a Canadian figure skater.
Yeah.
So figure skating was a little bit before hockey. So I was there, overlapped a little bit with the hockey, but ended up going back to, I was living in Calgary at the time. So went back, and I remember watching that golden goal. But I remember texting with him after and stuff like that. And just the moment, the moment stands out. I could tell you where I was, who I was with, just like most Canadians.
Oh yeah.
It was pretty cool. But yeah, that, I guess the thing, what's interesting, maybe you could say this about Connor scoring the game winner in the Four Nations. It just seemed meant to be for me. It just seemed like everything, the lead up, the build up, it's going to overtime. It's just, I think the hockey gods were in the building that night, and he's obviously been touched or blessed by, those people. So yeah, I think it couldn't have been more fitting that it was him that got it.
Last thing, now that I remember, because it has to do with training, we want to do a video where we take 100 shots for 100 days to try and improve our shots. We are beer league players. We have not played any high-level hockey.
Yeah.
But I think you're the perfect person to ask. Is there anything that you would recommend that we could be doing in order to achieve this goal of just improving our shots? Because whether it's off ice, on ice, this is something we want to do, and we want to ask the brightest minds in hockey on what we can do to better ourselves in this. And you are one of the brightest minds in hockey, and this conversation has been so fun. So I wanted to kind of end it there.
For sure. Yeah. I probably can't give you one thing, but I can give you a couple. So
I'll take it.
I would say when you, going back in time when the sticks were a little bit stiffer, you would see players shoot across their body a little bit more, back leg to front leg. And so that transfer of weight, or that transfer of energy from the back leg to the front leg, is important. You still see this a little bit with some players. Like Ovi does this a little bit. Some of the right-handed, right shot guys have that kind of like crossbody shot. But I would say the way it's going now with the sticks have so much flex that it's really like a motion down into the ice. So you have this pushing motion. So I think the muscles of the upper body, shoulders, triceps, that pushing motion is really important. So I think being able to do that in different hand positions, push-ups, dumbbell work, different barbell work, and into these pressing positions, and learning how to do those kind of explosively. So some of that like upper body push-up plyometric type stuff I think could be really valuable.
Okay.
And then the other thing is the rotation.
Okay.
So inevitably there's a turn of the shoulders, whether you're shooting across the body or you have that kind of downward motion into the ice to use the flex. At some point, your shoulders have to come through. And I would say in exercise, rotation, for whatever reason, people kind of forget about it. It tends to be something where people are doing a little bit more barbell work or uniplanar work. We call it single plane work. But that multiplanar work of throwing a medicine ball, using a cable, doing something on that rotational scenario probably is going to lend to your shot a little bit, I would say.
Okay. The goal is to not only improve, I guess, accuracy, but mainly power in our shots. So these both sound like things that we can kind of take with us. We're really appreciative of your time. Hope you enjoy the Olympics as much as we are going to as well. It's going to be a ton of fun watching them. I don't want to put you on the spot, but any predictions as a Canadian? We're rolling with Team Canada, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
That's the hope.
I do have clients on other teams,
Yeah.
including the U.S., but man, it's just going to be such good hockey. I think anything can happen, probably because it's a one game. Like, I worry about, if I'm on Team Canada, I'm worried about Czech, Sweden, even Finland. Like,
every nation seems to have caught up a little bit.
Every nation's caught up, but also they just a little less pressure, know. So there's no question. I think on paper Canada's the best team, and I think there's a few people in Canada that refuse to lose, and they just will find a way. So I'd have to go with my boys, I think. Yeah.
We can't wait to watch. We're really, again, grateful for your time, and wishing you all the best in the future.
Love it. Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, appreciate it.